Good evening and welcome to Between the Lines. I'm John Matisonn. My guest tonight is Justice Albie Sachs, the former judge on the South African Constitutional Court, who's just published his 10th book, We the People, Insights of an Activist Judge. Justice, welcome, and thanks for coming here.
And please call me Albie, or if you must be formal, Judge Albie. I'm very happy to be here.
Albie, you're 82, you've lost an arm, you've lost an eye, you have a 10-year-old son named Oliver in memory of Oliver Tambo, you have 14 honorary doctorates, this is your 10th book, and you have a wife, Vanessa, to keep you young. Is that your secret?
One wife, in fact, 21 honorary degrees.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, the last one was at Cambridge in Latin. I never, in my maddest imagination, ever imagined I'd be getting an honorary degree in Latin. I assume it was an honorary degree. They said it was.
You hope it wasn't something entirely different. Well, your books, we're looking at the titles of your book. They tell the story about South Africa's evolution. Your first couple of books were about prison experiences under apartheid. Then you looked at the South African law under apartheid. And then you move on to human rights and constitution making and your own journeys. And now you're reflecting on what this moment of poor governments and rising moral turpitude is telling us. Well, let me start with would you say that your views have evolved a lot in that time? I mean, I first met you in the 80s. I think you were a different person then.
Did I have two arms or one?
I can't.
88. I suspect I had two arms.
Yeah, you
we
did
met
have
in the
two
United
arms.
States.
Yes,
you were
did.
at National
That's
Public
right.
Radio.
You had two arms. That's
yes.
right.
Well, so I was different physically, and it wasn't just physically. The bomb did something quite extraordinary to me. I'd left South Africa defeated in many ways. Solitary confinement, torture by sleep deprivation, our movement was crushed, I'd gone into exile, I'd been stateless for years, and I'm in Mozambique, and I felt the upsurge of the Mozambican revolution. I felt the probable, the decline in the sense of the effervescence, the strength, the civil war, the bitterness. I'm blown up, I lose an arm, but I survived the bomb attack on me, and somehow that gave me an energy and a confidence and a sense of absolute certainty. As I got better, my country would get better. Not based on evidence. Not based on evidence. I'm a product of the Enlightenment. I believe in evidence and proofs. But this was based on deep intuition. And in that sense, I became a different person. I think a little less heavily ideological.
Yes.
In the sense of, and more human in many ways, with clear perspectives. And what I'd learnt in Mozambique actually was about pluralism and the importance of opposition and open debate and vitality. Not simply saying, well, you have open debate, everybody's equal, because that really allows the very rich, the very powerful, on the basis of a pseudo-formal equality to dominate everything, but possibilities for the poor, the dispossessed, to find emancipation, but not through dominating, not through expropriating the expropriators and dominating them the way I'd believed before, but through occupying the space available and through constitutionalism. And in that sense, I slowly came to constitutionalism, but once I did, then like many new converts, I became very enthusiastic about it.
Yes, that was the evolution I was thinking about. I want to take a step back and ask you about the impact of your father, Albie Sachs. People may not realize, but in his day, he was very, very well known. I mean, I grew up knowing his name. He was leader of the Garment Workers Union, and he fell out with the Communist Party. Tell us a bit about that and how he influenced you.
Well, that happened before I was born. I learned afterwards, when I joined the party in the underground, that my dad had been expelled from the Communist Party for right-wing deviationism.
Yes.
Which was very, very serious in those days,
yes.
As bad as left-wing deviationism. He'd taken workers to a picnic instead of marching down Elof Street to occupy, I think it was the Ritz Hotel, the Carlton Hotel.
Yes.
And that was seen as right-wing deviationism. He remained a bit of a Stalinist till his dying day. In fact, when the Russian troops marched into Czechoslovakia in '68, I was just shattered. I was so dismayed, and he said, Albie, you'll never be a Bolshevik.
That's a fascinating story, and we're going to come back a little later to your interaction with F.W. de Klerk about your father and his father. But I want to go forward with the book, because there are quite a lot of things in this book that you've said and that that you've now published, but that you said at different times, but didn't get much attention. For example, you make the point that there are a lot of people now saying that on the land issue, the problem is the Constitution. Some people say, it allows provides for willing buyer, willing seller, and market-related prices. And of course, that's not true. And you highlight that point. So what the Constitution actually says is there can be expropriation, and there can be prices below the market, but it has to be orderly and not arbitrary. Why has this failed so far?
Well, first of all, why did we put in those controls?
Right.
Land reform is a constitutional goal. In fact, the state is required to take steps to open up access to land. That's in the property clause. We don't have a clause that says everyone has the right to hold property. The clause says no one shall be arbitrarily deprived of property.
Right.
If you start off with a right to own property, then the status quo, which is manifestly unfair, is your point of departure.
Right.
The point of departure is you can be deprived of property, and land reform is a permissible objective. In the United States, it wouldn't be. You can't use land reform for social purposes. You can use it for an airport or a hospital, but not for social. In South Africa, our constitution expressly allows land reform as a social purpose, a public purpose. But it says the state itself doesn't determine the compensation to be paid, and we were very concerned. We'd seen what had happened in Kenya, for example. Jomo Kenyatta, 6 years in jail by the British, comes out afterwards. The Mau Mau did all the fighting, and he ends up president. He sends Odinga Odinga, who was pro-poor, to jail. He ends up super rich, his family owning enormous swathes of Kenyan property. The Mau Mau who did the fighting got nothing. And the Home Guards, who were then called the Askaris, a name well known in South Africa, who'd been fighting on the side of the British because they sent their children to school, they got the education.
They got the land.
We didn't want that to happen in South Africa.
We have to take a break. We'll be right back with Albie Sachs. And we're back with Judge Albie Sachs. Albie, the fact still is, it's the government that is not doing enough within the Constitution for land reform.
Okay, I'm a former judge. Lots of very sensitive cases are coming to the court, so I won't offer generalized opinions on questions like that. What I can say is the Constitution, first of all, it did require restitution of land. About 80,000 people, communities got land back. That's already been done. And there has been a certain amount of transfer of land from white to black hands, black ownership. But you still walk through South Africa and you can see the whites still own most of the wealthy parts of South Africa. That's a visible reality. And so far more could have been done under the Constitution than was actually done. The reasons for it, that's out there for public debate.
But your point is it's not the fault of the Constitution. The Constitution allows it to be done.
It allows it, it even requires it. It requires, there's a duty on the state to provide for access to land. But what has been held up as a barrier is that compensation is paid if you expropriate land. But the calculation of compensation is not market value. It's not willing seller, willing buyer. That's only one of 4 criteria. Compensation decided by the courts is just and equitable. Just and equitable. And the courts have almost, well, I'd say they've done more than drop hints, saying we've never been approached to decide exactly what's just and equitable. To take account of the history of the acquisition, the investment made, the benefits received from it, and market value is just one factor.
And you can adjust the price below market value.
Clearly,
Yes,
otherwise
absolutely.
why have that?
Absolutely. Well, this leads me to the other thing, which I noticed in your book that I thought very interesting. You hit back at the argument that is sometimes made in the public sphere that the Constitution was an elite compact, that a group of white business people and black political people got together in a smoke-filled room and did a deal. You strongly disagree with that.
You know, an amusing little anecdote is we lined up now, the enemy on that side, us on this side. And you know what the first issue was? The first agreement was whether smoking should be allowed or not. And the anti-smokers on our side, which included me, got together with the anti-smokers on the other side, and we decided no smoking. De Klerk was a heavy smoker, Kada Asmal, Daddy Musa were heavy smokers, they lost that battle. But that never happened. We never got instructions. We battled for 6 years on that constitution. We had breakdowns, rolling mass action, massacres. Chris Hani was assassinated. An RBB tank came crashing into the building.
I remember.
It was totally different from this idea of the saintly Mandela gets together with the wise de Klerk, they do a deal, go to the lawyers and say, give us a constitution.
But that links to the issue that we discussed earlier of land and many other things, that the Constitution provides for lots of things that haven't yet been fully utilized.
Basically, the Constitution provides for an open democratic society, majority rule, in terms of elections being meaningful. It presupposes that South Africa is an unfair society, an unjust society, and the achievement of a fair society is really what the Constitution is about. And we said very early on in our jurisprudence, ours is a constitution for transformation, not to preserve the status quo, but to bring about change. But we didn't want arbitrary plundering. Help yourself in the name of the revolution, in the name of the struggle. You grab it for yourselves, your family, and the elite around you. We didn't want that when we drafted the Constitution.
I want to follow up on that. You know, I worked in America at one stage, and there everybody knows who the founding fathers were, who wrote the Constitution. It was Jefferson and Madison and Hamilton, and they wrote the Federalist Papers and so on. Here, we're not as clear. I mean, Kennedy said, victory has 1,000 fathers, defeat is an orphan. So everybody claims I did a little bit here and there. Who were our founders of the Constitution, fathers of the Constitution, and mothers?
Okay, I have an opening line whenever I speak in public now, and it is, if you did a paternity test on our Constitution,
yes,
whose DNA would come up?
Right.
And very few people know, South Africans and abroad.
Yes.
They say, Mandela, no.
No.
De Klerk, no. You, no. Give up Oliver Tambo. It's not that he wrote the Constitution. He had the central core idea. And at that stage, we were in exile. Constitutional Committee set up by him, first under Jack Simons, then under Zola Skwier, Penwell Maduna, Bridget Babandla, a whole group of us on it, Kada Asmal, and we envisaging a new South Africa. We've got the Freedom Charter, but the Freedom Charter doesn't structure government. It doesn't deal with rights. It deals with the kind of country we want, but not how...
In very general terms.
In very general terms. So how do you convert that into an operational document for a society? And at that stage, power sharing was the big buzzword. Power sharing was seen as blacks on this side, the whites on that side, maybe Zulus, Afrikaners as well. And they were pushing it very heavily.
Which was not the ANC tradition at all.
No, and we would have had a parliament with racial groups, ethnic groups being represented as such. And we would have ended up with Mandela, president on Monday, de Klerk on Tuesday, Buthelezi on Wednesday. I'm actually exaggerating. It was going to be 6 months for each. And they would have to get consensus. And that had a lot of appeal internationally. Blacks and whites, well, they're different.
But you're saying it was Oliver Tambo who broke that?
He resisted that completely. He went for a Bill of Rights. And I remember a meeting we had in Lusaka, in a room not much bigger than this little studio we're in, crowded with ANC delegates from MK, from the underground, diplomats and others. And my heart's going boom, 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 boom. I'm asked to speak on why we need a Bill of Rights. And our comrades thought it was a bit of whites, you know. We can get majority rule, and that will stop us from doing anything. And I said there are three reasons. One, it makes us look good. It counteracts this notion of the bloodthirsty, power-crazed people. Two, it's the Oliver Tambo vision, not group rights in a structure of government, but rights for people, not because they're majority or minority, black or white, because they're human beings. And that was really our huge act of decolonization in South Africa. One person, one vote, democracy, majority rule in parliament was really our act of decolonization. 1910, the vote was given to whites only. Now everybody's having the vote. National liberation through democracy. And the Bill of Rights would mean we don't drive people into the sea because of their race. We don't go in for arbitrary detention without trial. We don't ban books. We respect the dignity of people. Very strong gender rights are included in there. And we try to project an emancipatory vision of rights. And we included social and economic rights, the rights to housing.
We have to break there. We'll follow up when we come back with Judge Albie Sachs. And we're back with Judge Albie Sachs talking about his new book, We the People, Insights of an Activist Judge. You started talking about socioeconomic rights, but before we get on to that, I just want to go back to the question of who were the fathers or parents of our Constitution. You say it was Oliver Tambo primarily because he drove the idea of the Bill of Rights. Is that
and that basic vision of a non-racial democratic South Africa? And one's got to understand, today non-racialism is seen as somehow being unfair to the majority and somehow glossing over the systemic divergences in our society. At that stage, the whites were running everything. Non-racialism was the instrument that destroyed white domination politically, constitutionally, legally.
Now, I know you were very close to, you felt very strongly about Oliver Tambo. You named your son in memory of him. For me, he was a bit of a mystery. I only met him once or twice outside the country. But he achieved one great thing, which was, many great things, but especially keeping the party together, the ANC together, in exile, which is, of course, extremely difficult, it's difficult for any exile movement, and particularly one as diverse as this. That was a great achievement, but to do that, didn't he have to turn a blind eye to things? I mean, for instance, some of the things that went wrong in the camps. He must have known...
On the contrary, because he took up those issues. That's why he became such a powerful leader. The Morogoro Conference in '69 was to deal precisely with the abuse by military leaders of MK people like Chris Hani, who rose it. Oliver was the one who said, now we discuss it democratically. I'm not a dictatorial leader who says you mustn't do this, that, and the other. They had very powerful discussions. With him, he instructed me to draft a code of conduct that would outlaw the use of torture against captured enemy agents.
Now, that has a resonance today. You may not want to comment on it, but I know a lot of the other ANC stalwarts, including your colleagues of former judges on the Constitutional Court, are calling for a consultative conference on the style of Morogoro, because they're arguing that that's where we are now, that the ANC under President Jacob Zuma needs a generalized consultative conference, not an elective conference, to reorient itself. Does that make sense to you?
Well, I attended a later consultative conference in Kabwe. Partly it was called consultative because OR refused to accept the title of president of the organization. He said only when we have a conference in South Africa in conditions of freedom can we choose our president. He said, I'm the acting president, and we call these consultative conferences because our leaders, and he always insisted that Nelson Mandela was the commander-in-chief, or on Robben Island and elsewhere. But the idea then was to try and deal with the impatience of the younger members of the ANC then, especially in MK, with a layer of military leadership, political military leadership in the camps. At Kabwe, which used to be the old Broken Hill in former northern Rhodesia, we had a conference in '85. I presented the code of conduct. which outlawed the use of torture, which gave people inside the ANC rights if they were alleged to have driven a car and smashed it up or assaulted somebody. Then you had procedures to deal with it. We had a Bill of Rights inside the ANC even before we got back and got the vote.
Would that apply today in the current circumstances? Is there a comparison?
You know, the one comment I will make is that there's a huge debate going on inside the ANC now. A huge debate. It's intense, it's powerful, people feel very, very deeply about it. And it's well known that more than 100 veteran leaders have spoken out forcefully, very, very calmly. And as they see it, they are rescuing the soul, rescuing the tradition of the organization. Other people see it differently. So it's a very, very lively, maybe the most important debate in South Africa today is the one that's not the most open one, but the most intense one.
But you have chosen not to sign to those things, whereas as a judge, as a former judge, but some former judges have.
Yes, in fact, I was interviewed at a launch of the book in Durban by Sach.
Yes.
And he was prodding me a little bit.
Because he signed it, and he's a former
And he's
judge.
spoken out very, very
Yes.
forcefully. I've chosen, in that sense, a different stance. And maybe he doesn't write books. I write books. I speak about Oliver Tambo. I speak about the values. I don't get involved in the partisan debates in that way. I've got my own views. And I think my contribution could be more worthwhile at that level.
Well, I have found value in this book because it does deal with some of those questions, and we're going to come back to them. But before we run out of time, and we are going to continue for the following session, for next week, we talked about who are the fathers or parents of the Constitution. You've said Oliver Tambo. Who else wrote it? Who were the key people?
Yes, the writing, you know, we had literally hundreds of people at CODESA at different stages, involved with theme committees, different kind of committees and so on, drafting groups. We actually had 5 people. It was Arthur Chaskelson, Moseneki, somebody, Grove, I think, from the National Party side. I forget who else were on the drafting committee of the interim constitution. But they didn't, they gave it...
But that's more detail.
Not detail, they gave it specific language.
Yes.
Section 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yes.
And we had breakdowns. And you know, we battled over the process. Would the negotiators draft a constitution, which is what the Nats wanted? We called them the enemy. The enemy, then they became the regime. Then they became the bloody government. Then they became the other side as negotiations.
And then became partners eventually.
The opposition, partners in the opposition. Any event, they wanted us to negotiate a constitution there and then, put it to a referendum. We said no. We said our people have never had self-determination, the right.
We've only got 1 minute left.
How to be governed, yes.
Who were the real authors?
No, so
Arthur Chaskelson in Namibia was the primary author, wasn't he, of that constitution?
He was an author in a technical sense.
Yes.
But the basic ideas, a lot came from Ismail Mohammed with SWAPO and many others. In the case of our constitution, key players were clearly Cyril Ramaphosa had an extremely important role.
Right.
And Rolf Meyer
Yes.
emerged as a very thoughtful, sensible, tough negotiator, but very principled on the other side. But there were many others. Colin Eglin played a very valuable role, a non-lawyer. A certain person named Pravin Gordon, who'd been a pharmacist, was a brilliant chair of the most difficult meetings. He pulled something out of that. Vali Musa was important. And Freni Chinwala, important. Theme,
And yourself.
if you say so.
On that note, we're going to end it. The book is We the People, Insights of an Activist Judge. It's well worth reading. We're going to leave it there for tonight, but we will carry on next week. Thanks for watching, and happy reading.